your source for the latest rumors, news, and reviews in Hollywood. Welcome to Technicolor Blood. Here are your hosts, Chris and Terrence.
Welcome into another episode of Technicolor Blood. We really appreciate you guys joining us this week. My name's Chris. I'm here with Terrence. How you doing, Terrence?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good and looking forward to talking about some movie stuff.
All right. Yep, we got a lot to get to this week. There's some news upcoming that we'll discuss. Another update to the whole James Gunn saga, which we pretty much seem to hit on every week on the show, and we have yet another update this week. But first, I think we should start with this new Oscars news. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the biggest news going on right now.
Yeah, so the Oscars have announced they're going to add a category called Outstanding Achievement in Popular Film. I have questions about this.
As well you should.
They didn't really do much to answer the natural questions that would come out of that announcement. You know, they didn't couple it with, here are some parameters. They just basically said, outstanding achievement in popular film. According to the failing New York Times, there was a letter, the letter that announced it by Dawn Hudson, who's one of the executives at the Academy. She didn't specify what would constitute a popular film or whether the movies nominated in that category could also be nominated for Best Picture. Later on, a spokesperson said that yes, they could be. So I'm sort of extra confused here.
So I think we need to unpack this a little bit and start by pointing out that for a few years now, Oscar viewership has been in the decline. And additionally, they've received a lot of criticism over the last few years as well. And I think all of this is probably in response to those two factors, chiefly.
Some self-inflicted stuff there too. You had the huge gaffe a couple of years ago,
yes,
where they announced the wrong movie, La La Land, ended up being Moonlight.
Yes,
some questionable choices for their host over the last few years,
mm-hmm.
and there was almost a 20% decline in viewership from this past Oscars from the previous one. But even more alarmingly, I'd read that as recent as something like 2014, they had something like 43 million viewers, and this latest one had something in the low 20s. I mean, that's an incredible, steep drop off.
That's insane. And I mean, let's not forget Oscar's So White.
Right, Oscar's So White.
Which, I mean, in my opinion, was totally legit.
Yeah, it was legit, and I think legitimately the Academy, I don't want to say overreacted to it the next year, but it just seemed like they were sort of in a no-win situation that they caused themselves the next year, where they sort of had to nominate to a lot of black actors and filmmakers, and hey, that's great that they actually got a stage that year, but it also felt like there's a lot of people. Of course, it caused a lot of controversy saying, "Oh, well, the Academy is just overreacting and pandering now." So then you had a whole social media political aspect that got jammed into the conversation, which happens all the time now, of course.
Well, of course. But
clearly, this is a move to get people to watch movies who actually spend the money to go watch movies. I understand the mentality of, there's all these super popular movies that make hundreds of, literally billions of dollars, and they're never represented on the Oscars. And yet they have this whole ceremony where they honor the best of movies. And you could make the argument, what are movies about? It's about entertainment. And the most entertaining movies aren't represented. So I understand the logic, but it also feels, I don't want to say cheapening, but because I'm not like a huge Oscar fan, I'm not an award show fan in general. I had a big problem with a couple of years ago when they expanded the nominated list from 5 to 9 or 10.
Yeah, that was garbage. Just
for the marketing aspect, so they can say this is an Academy Award nominee.
I mean, yes, that's probably a piece of it, but I always felt that another reason they wanted to do that was it gave them an excuse to throw in more popular movie titles into the marketing of that year's Oscars. Mm-hmm. I mean, if they didn't expand it from 5, let's be honest, the Oscars are not going to nominate a superhero movie, regardless of how good it is, as demonstrated by The Dark Knight.
Which I think was the first year that they expanded the nominees, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh man, has it been that long?
I think it has been.
Yikes! Wow.
And I want to say that's, I could be wrong about that, like many things, but that's a good example of one of the questions, which will be, like this year, that same article that I mentioned earlier mentioned Black Panther. Is Black Panther going to be eligible for a Best Picture Oscar? Is it only going to be eligible for a most popular achievement in film Oscar? They're going to get some backlash either way. Again, it's they're going to corner themselves in a no-win situation at some point with this.
Oh yeah, you can already feel fanboys lining up to take shots at them, saying, that this is just a way of corralling popular movies and popcorn movies, and chiefly at this point in time, superhero movies, into a separate category so they don't pollute the Best Picture nominations.
Right.
And I mean, I don't necessarily see it that way. I mean, I think it's kind of a cool decision in that, like you were saying, people only see so many movies, and right now the movies that they're seeing are the popular ones. They're not going to see the critical hits and, stuff from the heavy directors. And when the Oscars just make an entire ceremony out of those movies, it is kind of alienating to the general movie-going audience.
Sure. Yeah, and I get that. I have mixed feelings about it. I kind of like the idea of giving those movies a way to be recognized, but because I am just so clutching to my semantics on things, I really want to know what the parameters are going to be. When they say popular, what does that mean? Is it going to be based on X amount of box office?
It's got to be. It's got to come down to money.
And then again, like when you have a movie that falls into both categories, how's that going to work? I just have a lot of questions. I mean, I'm sure, as usual, I'm just overreacting to the early news, and eventually they'll release all the parameters, and maybe it'll make sense, maybe it won't. The idea that something is successful doesn't necessarily mean that it's good quality. We've seen that over and over and over and over again. But they certainly deserve a place at the table.
Yeah. And I mean, it's important for them to figure out something to stop the hemorrhaging of viewers. I mean, at the rate they're going, it's going to be pushed off of a major network location, and you're going to be watching the Oscars on TNT or something, some garbage network like that.
Yep. And another part of the announcement was they're apparently going to really strengthen their resolve in trying to get the show to 3 hours. I don't think that starts this year. I think that starts the following year. Although the first Popular Achievement Award will be the next ceremony. The time when they enact this idea of trying to always close it up at 3 hours is going to be the following year, which seems impossible to me. Yeah. But apparently they're going to. And this is another area where they're gonna piss off some real film fans. They're gonna start giving some of the awards during commercial breaks. And how long before the writers get their award during a commercial?
Right. And we go through this cycle every few years where they're tired of getting beat up for running long, and so they're like, we're gonna make an effort to bring things under a certain time limit, and so they start cutting off people's speeches and playing the music, and then. Viewers get pissed off about that. It's a no-win situation for the Oscars. Yep. They're never going to be able to make it short enough, and any efforts they make to keep it from spiraling out of control is going to upset people as much as the runtime does.
Yeah, and this isn't even to mention the fact that every year in the current climate, there's always leading up to the Oscars, there's always sort of a social media fight about, oh God, I'm not going to watch because there's going to be so many politics discussed, and they try to. I want to say I read something last year. They tried to impress upon folks that were giving speeches not to get too political, but I mean that's exactly the kind of thing that would lead to people being political,
right?
Especially when you're rich and powerful. Like, what are you going to do? You're just sure, I'm not going to give my opinion. That's not going to happen.
And you're talking about Hollywood. I mean, you're talking about a bastion of a particular political slant, and man, when they get together as a group, they really fuel each other.
Right, and then you throw on top of that, like you were saying. Someone's up there talking about something very serious, or it could be political. It could be how they were inspired by their mother who recently passed, and all of a sudden the music swells and this guy's supposed to shut up. I mean, it's just an awkward, unwieldy thing.
Absolutely. So before we wrap this up, I just want to clarify my opinion of this, and that is, I mean, I think it's actually a good thing because, listen, whenever we talk about Oscars, one of the things we constantly complain about is nobody sees those movies, right? And if you do want to see them, you just wait and you sort of watch them all together as a crunch, either right before the Oscars or right after the Oscars. And they don't really reflect what the general movie-going audience cares about or is paying any attention to. But at the same time, I don't want the Oscars to just be about biggest box office, right? Sure. I like the fact that they're celebrating filmmaking that isn't just purely money driven.
Yeah.
And, that's why we get movies from directors that don't make superhero movies or don't make Star Wars movies. And, you know, I think it's great that they champion that. And I think that it's great that there's a platform for us to celebrate those films. So I think this is a valid attempt to keep doing the Oscars like they've been doing and celebrating the things that they've been celebrating, but also give us an outlet for the thing that we all know is really happening, which is everybody is just going to see the same 10 movies over the course of the year. So let's actually talk about those 10 movies.
Sure. And I think another positive element of this is they essentially are the way the Oscars are now. And I mean, I guess have been for years. There's so many movies that are celebrated that don't demand to be seen on the big screen.
Yes.
And with the way technology is and people are watching movies on their phones and their iPads, the idea that you might want to try to pull some younger viewers in and some movie fans in who are going to be celebrating these movies that command to be seen on the big screen. I mean, there are certain movies for you and I that if we don't see them on the big screen, we'll never see them.
Absolutely.
But we may not have seen them otherwise at all.
Right.
Had they not had a release in the theaters. So from that aspect, I think it's a positive thing. It's of course, you know, you're fighting the torrent of phones and technology and all that, but I just like the idea of giving a movie that needs to be seen on a big screen, you know, a place in the spotlight like that. Right.
And you know, you're bringing up Black Panther as an excellent point. Is Black Panther the best movie of the year? Well, I mean, the year's not over, but in the first half, I would say resoundingly, no, it's not the best movie. That's ridiculous. Is it a movie that is important, whether or not for the actual movie itself or just for what it means to society, what it means to the industry, what it means to black actors and writers and directors in the industry? I mean, yeah, absolutely. It's a sea change.
Undoubtedly.
It needs to be talked about. It needs a place at the Oscars. Does that mean it needs to be nominated for Best Picture? I mean, if you're going to nominate 10 movies, okay, fine. If you were just going to nominate the 5 best movies of the year, it's doubtful. This gives us a chance to talk about that movie, gives us a chance to celebrate it. It gives us a chance for the people who made that movie to actually go up on stage and, you know, give a speech and accept an award. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. People that ignore the social aspect of that movie, I can't have a conversation with them.
Yeah, absolutely not.
It's vital to everything around that movie. So yeah, I mean, mixed feelings on it, but I'm all for the Oscars trying to evolve. I mean, hell, I never watch anymore. The last time I watched, I tuned in to see Leo get his award because I was hoping he would win.
Right.
Before that, I think I might have tuned in when Scorsese got his award because I wanted him to win, even though I wasn't a huge fan of The Departed. But that's pretty much it. I just pop in and see what's going on, and basically Twitter fills in the blanks about, you know, anything that was worth catching up on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anything that might bring in more viewers is a good thing, and you know, it'd be fun to see the whole cast of, you know, Infinity War up there or Black Panther accepting an award.
Absolutely.
Another piece of news. We've discussed this at length, but it begs bringing up again. As we've discussed in recent weeks, the James Gunn situation with Disney Marvel and how James Gunn was fired from from Guardians 3 after the old comments on Twitter surfaced. And we speculated about what would happen with the script. And it turns out, at least as of now, because there were some conflicting reports earlier in the week, but the Hollywood Reporter has reported that Disney Marvel actually is going to go forward with James Gunn's script, which on the surface is extremely hypocritical. Obviously, we're going to wait for more details to come out, but I don't really see any way to spin that.
Yeah, I don't either. You know, there are a couple minor issues that play with that. Dave Bautista, who plays Drax in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, you know, he's become increasingly vocal about not appreciating that James Gunn is being completely erased from it. So he kind of made it his hill to die on, that if they didn't use James Gunn's script, then he would at least entertain the idea of breaking his contract and walking away from that movie.
Boy.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bold statement from a guy who is probably not crucial to the production of the third Guardians of the Galaxy film. But beyond that, also too, I think an important fact is it's really, really hard to line up an A-list director if you don't have a script to show them. And I mean, you know, some directors would like that. Some would want to be involved from the very beginning. But I think in this case, when you've got a set release date already locked in place and a director who's going to have to step into what's going to be a shitstorm online,
Yep. No win situation.
Yeah, you've got to give them as many safeguards as you possibly can, and a script from the guy who wrote the first 2 movies and knows what the hell he's doing. I mean, that's gold.
Adding intrigue to this, just today, actually just a couple of hours ago, at least for the time that I read on it, apparently Marvel is really dead set on trying to bring James Gunn back, and Marvel is engaging with Disney, who apparently is far on the other side against bringing him back. So apparently this is not completely dead yet. We'll see what happens, but it's pretty interesting to me that it's kicked up again even after Disney. I mean, they didn't really make a declarative statement last week. In fact, I think it just came out as people reporting Disney is thought to not be interested in bringing him back. They never actually released the statement, which is another thing we talked about. We were looking forward to Disney's official statement, which still hasn't come, I don't think.
Yeah, part of that might be because a couple other studios, specifically Warner Brothers, has very publicly said they would be interested in working with James Gunn. For
sure.
So I think Marvel, I mean, let's be honest, they don't want James Gunn to go make a DC movie.
Yeah.
So they...
If I was him, that's exactly what I would do.
Absolutely. Why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, so that'll be interesting to see. You would think that this would get solved pretty quickly because they are slated for a 2020 release date. It was supposed to start shooting sometime fairly soon. Right. So, I mean, clearly, I'm sure they felt gun to their head on the script situation. So they made that call to go ahead and use the script because that would delay them. That would inevitably delay the movie.
Absolutely.
So they sort of sidestepped their morals, I guess, and decided to go ahead and continue with the script. But I still haven't seen. I've only seen rumors of replacement directors at this point.
I haven't even seen those.
Yeah, one of which was Taika Waititi, who did Thor Ragnarok, which I absolutely loved. One of my favorite movies of that year. But I mean, just. I don't. It just seems like cross pollination there. I don't know. It's not so much that it's too much of the same, but he's got a very specific tone to his couple of movies that he's directed. Right. So I don't know about all that. It's not happening. It's been shot down. So that's not something that's actively being reported or anything. But it's just really strange, and it makes me wonder if really they are having discussions about bringing James Gunn back, because there's literally been nothing about a new director for this huge movie that's going to be coming out in 2020.
Right. And another weird thing, I've seen these rumors floating around that he can't come back for Guardians of the Galaxy 3, but they might try to bring him back for a different Marvel movie. Have you seen those rumors? God. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me.
They're twisting themselves in knots over this. Just bring him back.
Yes.
It's understandable that I'm not even going to say they overacted. Maybe they made the right decision. Maybe they didn't. I don't know. It's understandable that they made a snap judgment in the heat of the moment. If they're worried about embarrassment, like we've talked about before, Disney's fine. Right. No one is going. This is if they're worried that they're going to look and their stock is going to drop off the face of the planet tomorrow. It's not happening.
Yes. I mean, if the decision that you're going to make is the one that makes the people who are going to see that movie happy,
yes,
how can that be viewed as the wrong decision?
Yes. The people who are so clutched to their political beliefs is a small enough number that the ones that refuse to see a movie over something as ridiculous as that, it won't even be a blip.
Yes, absolutely. So, and as we've talked about, outside of the people who are absolutely movie geeks and following this stuff, nobody in the wider world has any idea who's directing these movies.
Right, yeah, exactly.
They don't know who James Gunn is. They have no clue.
Yep. Yeah, so constantly evolving situation. I'm sure there'll be yet another update next week, and we'll talk about that when it comes.
Looking forward to it.
All right, well, in the next segment, we are going to discuss the new Star Trek series.
Yeah, so we don't really dabble too terribly much in television, but this is kind of big news, and Patrick Stewart has gone on to become a big-time film actor as well. He's famously Captain Picard from Star Trek The Next Generation. That is, without question, the most popular Star Trek series that's ever been made. It ended after doing, 4 feature films after running for 7 years on television. That last feature film was just so terribly, terribly bad that it shot the franchise in the head. But, here we are 20 years later or whatever it is, and CBS Television, which owns the rights to Star Trek on TV, has had, I guess, some moderate success with a new Star Trek series from last year called Star Trek Discovery. It's only available on their paid subscription app, which is CBS All Access or whatever it is. So it's been successful enough. I think it's literally the only thing on that app that anyone has ever bought the app to watch. So they're like, hey, if 1 is good, 2 is better. And so they've now reached a deal with Patrick Stewart, Sir Patrick Stewart, to come back, reprise the character of Captain Picard, and do another show for them to be released exclusively on their app.
With the way it's difficult to sort of judge ratings and viewership with the sort of evolving new media of streaming television and apps and all that, I think we might have hit on this a little bit before, but it's just hard for me to believe that there's enough appetite for Star Trek television based on the fact that I haven't heard overwhelming buzz about Discovery that they could actually do a concurrently running Star Trek series. Because as far as I know, they have no plans to move on from Discovery at this point. I assume that what this is CBS saying, we have a once-in-a-lifetime shot to bring back one of the most beloved characters in TV history who's willing to do it. There's no time like the present. It's probably not our best idea to have 2 Star Trek shows running at once, especially when the appetite, like I said, doesn't seem like it's there. But when else are we going to have this chance? What are we going to do? Tell Patrick Stewart to wait 6 years or whatever? It's not going to happen.
Well, have a seat, because I'm about to tell you something that's going to blow your mind.
Okay.
They have also, and I believe are still currently looking for a way to do additional spin-off series using the characters from Star Trek Discovery. It's entirely possible there could be 3 Star Trek series going on at the same time on this magical app.
Hold on. You meant to say spin-offs from Discovery, right?
Yes.
So they're going to do a spin-off of a show that isn't really all that hugely popular already?
Yes.
That's really strange.
So here's the thing too. We don't really know how popular it is because there's no ratings for it. It's a subscription service. They're not releasing what the numbers of subscribers are. So we don't really know how many people are getting to the show, watching the show, how many of them are signing up for the service in order to see the show. It's kind of all theoretical at this point. But the 2 important takeaways from this are, 1, clearly there are other shows besides Star Trek being made for the service. I think there was a spinoff from The Good Wife. That was another one that they touted heavily. Regardless, nobody knows what they are. They're irrelevant. They weren't successful. Whatever the new batch for the new season of programming that they're going to produce for it is, again, no one's talking about it. The only thing anyone knows the service for is for Star Trek. It's basically the Star Trek service.
Yeah, the Star Trek app.
Yeah, which really, why don't they just do that? Mm-hmm. I mean, they've got thousands of hours of content for that. That would be a brilliant idea.
Yeah, maybe they should just rebrand it and make it the home for all Star Trek content they own.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what you just said.
So, yeah, everybody who's listening to us right now, just when CBS does this, you're our witnesses that it was our idea first.
That's right. Yes, it's going to happen.
Anyway, the other takeaway from this that I think we should touch on is just this is sort of another illustration of how streaming services are clearly perceived as the future, and everybody is throwing all of the money at these. Mm-hmm. I mean, Netflix just continues to pour hundreds of millions of dollars into developing new TV shows and new films. I think it's actually up to $1 billion now.
It is.
In new content. I have no idea what their debt is. It must be huge. I know they're not even remotely close to making a profit, but they're just pouring money into this production. You've got Hulu that's ramping up, trying to do more and more productions. You've got Amazon, they're ramping up, trying to do more and more productions. Somewhere deep in the shadows, working behind the scenes, everyone is talking about Apple working on something as well.
Yep.
I mean, you've got Disney ramping something up where they're going to pull all their content from Netflix and they're going to start producing a new Star Wars series. They're going to produce additional Marvel movies specifically for this service. I mean, it's crazy. It's becoming the Wild West of entertainment out there.
Yeah. The Disney thing is interesting because there was some news that came out a couple of days ago that I guess they were Turner or whatever the parent company of TNT is nowadays was offered a deal, I guess, to break their contract for the Star Wars movies they have.
Yes.
So that they could then go live with them in 2019 when Netflix or when Disney launches their streaming service.
So just to clarify for people listening, Disney obviously owns the rights to Star Wars. They bought it from George Lucas. However, the television rights, the rights to air those movies on television, were from a previous contract purchased by TNT, and they have them for some number of years going into the future. Disney just wants to break that contract and be able to start running their Star Wars movies on their own service.
Yeah, and basically TNT told them to get bent. So
and why wouldn't you?
Exactly. So it's one of those things where Disney's going to be ready to jump in with Netflix. They're going to they have everything in the chamber loaded, ready to fire, and I guess in their discussions in the boardroom, they always assumed, we'll be able to get the rights back away from TNT. It won't be a problem. And TNT is, at this point, just basically giving them the middle finger, meaning that there won't be any Star Wars movies on the service when it launches in 2019 that had been released prior to 2019.
Yes.
Which also, so it also includes The Last Jedi and I assume Solo, which, I mean, no one wants to watch that again, but so it's kind of a dent in Disney's plans, but it's not going to hurt them. They're going to keep going strong, and it'll be, and like you said, it's like the Wild Wild West out there with all the streaming services. It's clearly the way of the future. I just should expect there would be more and more of these. There's so many more that we're not even mentioning that we've never even heard of.
Right.
Like if any of you out there have an Apple TV, go to the homepage. There's 3 or 4 on there that I've never even dove into, but there's so many of these streaming services out there. So
yeah, I feel like everyone is trying to carve out a little piece of that pie now. So we're seeing this proliferation of them. But we're probably only a few years away before they start gobbling each other up, right? Because, you're going to need, every film studio is going to need a streaming service. Every network is going to need a streaming service. But, then you're spreading it too thin. How many $10 monthly subscriptions are people willing to pay? So they're going to have to start partnering up at some point. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's kind of great now because there's more content than anyone can consume. I mean, you can't keep up with all of it.
Yeah, you can't.
But 10 years from now, we're probably going to be back down to just, 4 mega conglomerations, and we're all frustrated that there's nothing good on any of them.
Yes. After the fall of Netflix.
Yes.
In 2028.
Right.
So,
but seriously, do not take financial advice from us. If you think Netflix is a good deal, by all means, go ahead and buy their stock.
Yes. Well, I mean, it doesn't seem to be stopping.
I know. I don't understand.
I don't understand it either. Like you said, so much debt.
Yes.
I don't know.
How far are we from Netflix buying a movie studio, do you think?
What's to stop them now?
Yeah. I mean, they're spending so much money just on production costs. Just buy your own facility.
Why not triple your debt? Just do it.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that's the American way, right?
Sure.
On a small scale in every home in America, it happens every single day.
Right.
It might as well happen in corporate America as well.
They should just make a ploy to buy Warner Brothers or something.
I'm not smart enough to understand if they could actually do that right now.
I have no idea what I'm talking about.
It would not surprise me.
Pay no attention.
All right. Well, we'll take a quick break here. And come back and we'll discuss a little bit of news about a beloved actress that we lost recently, just to bring it down a little bit.
So another tidbit of news that I think is worth discussing is it was revealed just today, I think, at the time that we're recording this, that the cause of Margot Kidder's death back in May was a suicide. She mixed drugs and alcohol to end her own life.
Pretty sad. She definitely has a place in everyone of our age and older and younger's hearts for her work in Superman. But there's some more interesting stuff about her that Terrence is going into a little bit of detail about it. She's kind of one of those people who was on the periphery of a lot of interesting things that happened in Hollywood. She was sort of around for a lot of stuff that happened that people would kill to be a fly on the wall, to hear the discussions and that sort of thing going on behind closed doors.
Right. And most of this is outlined in a pretty famous book about Hollywood in the 1970s. That's Easy Riders and hold on.
Yep.
Easy Riders and Raging Bulls.
That's it.
Okay. I always have trouble with that title. Anyway, in it, it's a movie that kind of outlines the birth of 1970s film culture. If you're a fan of movies, then you're almost certainly a fan of 1970s films. And this book discusses the kind of coming together and rising of this whole little class of filmmakers at that time. And it's interesting how many of those stories, somewhere within the story, you find out that Margot Kidder was at least there when it happened. She seemed to have been at all the right parties. She seemed to have known all the right people. She seemed to have been played a part in so many people getting roles or in filmmakers getting films off the ground. You used the term that she was almost like the Forrest Gump of that era, and I think that's kind of a clever way of putting it. Mm-hmm. I would say that, and I don't know if it's ever really articulated this way, but you sort of get the feeling that maybe she was something of a muse for some of the young filmmakers at the time. I think she was a little bit older maybe than some of them, and so she probably seemed more sophisticated that way. She got her start acting in the 60s, and then kind of began having her more breakout roles take place in the early 70s. Mm-hmm. So these guys were still in film school in the 60s and even into the early 70s, and so they were just making their early first films. I want to say she was maybe in Brian De Palma's second film as the lead. So she was there at the beginning, and again, as you mentioned, she played a pretty important part in a certain generation of people's growing up, playing the part of Lois Lane in the Superman movies. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of significant now because obviously superhero movies are huge. They're the thing in Hollywood. And I don't think anyone who's making movies about superheroes would deny that Richard Donner's Superman the movie is, the template that they all follow.
It to this day is still one of the top superhero movies ever, despite all the technology and everything that's come afterwards.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely.
Yeah, and the scene of Margot Kidder falling into the crack of the earth during the earthquake it was in the original, I think, yes. Right? Of course, because everything in the other ones was not good.
Yes, and you've luckily forgotten all of it.
different topic for a different show, but the original Superman the movie. That scene where she fell into the rock and she was covered in dust in her car. I mean, that I remember that as a kid. That I won't say that scarred me, but like the terror of that moment, I remember very vividly that shot of her like settling into the ground, and the car kind of shaking and dropping, and her like screaming and losing it until she goes silent, and the whole like scene that follows where Superman absolutely loses his shit and you see some emotion and anger from him, which was like, I didn't realize how awesome that was when I was a kid, because years later we were begging for something like that in some of the newer Superman movies, and it never came, or it was done poorly.
Yes. But
there was that emotion out of Christopher Reeve, and you combine that with Margot Kidder's performance in that movie, and it was just a very memorable scene and a memorable part to a movie that had some real emotional impact for something that was about a guy flying around in tights.
Absolutely. And not enough has been said about the fact that she's not just playing the victim of the movie. She's not just constantly being saved by Superman, and she's not fawning over Superman either. Mm-hmm. Like, she plays a very strong, independent character. Her take on Lois Lane is a professional woman who is every bit as impressive today as she was then. I mean, it must have been mind-blowing at the time to see that kind of a character in a popcorn movie, in an era where that term was literally being defined in the moment. But I mean, you watch superhero movies now, and how many of them have cast a great actress as the girlfriend of the superhero, mm-hmm. and they're utterly forgettable. And I mean, seriously, how many of those actresses have just chosen not to even come back in subsequent films? Sure. Natalie Portman tapped out of the waste of time that she was spending on those Thor movies. And I mean, I'm sure Amy Adams is locked up in some sort of contract to keep doing those Superman films for DC right now. But I mean, talk about being woefully underused.
Yeah. Such a waste of her time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously the Lois Lane character sort of became that in the sequels to that original Superman. But in that first film, she is every bit the equal to Superman in every way. And I mean, she is the superior of Clark Kent, hands down, but she is the equal to Superman. And though she's attracted to him, she doesn't fawn over him. She doesn't do silly things about him.
Her low tolerance for Clark Kent's bumbling, it amuses me now when I see it. That character was just so well drawn, and I mean, she brought something to it that I'm sure wasn't there on the page.
Absolutely. And at the time she was in some other movies. She was in the original Amityville Horror movie. And she kept working after the Superman films, never kind of in the same level of prominence, but I mean, her career went on for decades.
Yeah.
In other movies and then on television and voiceover work. Yep. She showed up everywhere. If you go bring up her IMDb page, you will be shocked at the volume of work that she continued to do.
It's a torrent of stuff, and a lot of it you never heard of, but she was constantly working.
Yes.
And just going back to your talk about how she was in that book featured prominently in that Raging Bull, Easy Riders Raging Bulls book. Well, I mean, what an interesting life. It's too bad that she never got around to, at least as far as I know, writing a book that collects all the crazy stories that she might have.
Right.
There might be something out there from several years ago, but certainly not anything recent that I'm aware of. Just to be a fly on the wall in those days in the 70s with, De Palma and Scorsese, and I assume Francis Ford Coppola showed up, Spielberg.
Yes.
He probably brought his dumb friend Lucas along. I don't know. just to be around for those discussions and to hear the spark of what so many of those guys would become. I mean, there's pictures from all those guys hanging out, and usually when you see pictures like that, it's like, oh, I recognize that guy and that guy. Who are those other four guys? And these couple of women in the background. Who are these people? The pictures from all those days, everyone turned out to be huge.
Yes.
Like massive successes, like legendary filmmakers. There's just no era like that, and she was right in the middle of it when it was all going down.
Yeah, that's actually a great topic for discussion. I mean, just the 70s film era it's so unique and so just powerful in every way. The people who came to the forefront, they changed the face of cinema, and then they inspired this entire subsequent generation of filmmakers who have just been chasing the same sort of transformative power of film ever since.
Yep.
It's worth its own discussion. But to get back to Margot Kidder for a moment, she, unfortunately, toward the end of her life, her battle with bipolar disorder kind of came to dominate what she was known for. And, really tragically, she had an episode several years ago where, it was basically a manic episode, but it was, in public and stretched out over the span of days. I think she was assaulted during the midst of it. And anyway, unfortunately, she became sort of a punchline. And I mean, looking back on it, it's hard. I mean, we don't, just even a few short years later, I feel like we live in a world where that would not have been allowed to happen. Like, you don't take somebody with this clear sickness, this disease, and then turn it into the punchline of a Saturday Night Live skit or whatever. But unfortunately, that is what happened, and I think that's kind of became what people remember her for, even more so than her role as Lois Lane at this point.
Yeah, a tragic end to I guess I'll call it a life well lived and a long productive career.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, if you're a fan of superhero movies and you have never seen Superman the movie from Richard Donner, or it's been years and years, maybe decades since you have, and you don't really remember it, or you think you remember it and you think it was a cheesy movie from the 70s, you really, really need to rewatch this movie and realize it is the blueprint, more so than Tim Burton's Batman film. Richard Donner's Superman the movie is the template for the good Marvel movies that you're getting to enjoy today.
Yeah, I mean, watch it and just think about, you're gonna if you haven't seen it, or maybe you're a little younger, you'll snicker when you see the costumes, and it's a movie. I guess it's a movie of its time, but the characters are timeless.
Yes,
and that's just something that doesn't get paid much attention to now. You don't watch these movies, the superhero movies now, and think, oh man, that specific character was so well drawn. Watch Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor in this movie. Margot Kidder, like we talked about. I mean, the characters are so well drawn for a movie that is a superhero movie. And I only use that phrase for a superhero movie because that's what superhero movies have become. It's become something where people say, well, I just want to be entertained. And that's fine. But there's no reason they can't be good. Yes. And that was a good movie, regardless of it being about superheroes and comic books. It was just a good, solid movie.
Yes, absolutely. And especially in light of, and we've both complained about the version of Superman that we get from the DC movies now. Christopher Reeve's take on Superman in that film is just, it's iconic. It's an iconic performance. Yep. So that's enough about that. But you know what? This does make me think that at some point we need to probably do a deep dive on Richard Donner, because that is a guy who is underrated and has a career that any director would envy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so maybe we'll hit that up in the future sometime. In the meanwhile, we're going to just pause for a second. And when we come back, we're going to talk some movie trailers.
So we have another new set of trailers to discuss this week, as we like to do every week. We're going to start off with a movie that looks like it's gaining some steam as far as people wanting to see it. We'll see if we feel the same way after watching the trailer. The movie is called Glass. It's going to be the next in the series, I guess you have to call it a trilogy now, of Unbreakable from M. Night Shyamalan. And then a couple of years ago, Split came out. And now this is the third movie in the series that we didn't know was a series until the end of Split. Spoilers. Sorry about that. Glass, based on the Mr. Glass character, Sam Jackson. Terrence.
So let me just lay my cards out on the table right here and say I've seen Unbreakable, of course. I've seen it a few times. I have not seen Split. And the reason for that is, let's just be honest. M. Night's career just cratered in on itself. He made so many terrible movies after that illustrious beginning. It wore me down, and I just eventually drew a line in the sand and said I couldn't watch any more of his films. And Split came along after that line was drawn, and despite the fact that some people have said some positive things about it, I just have zero desire in sitting through another one of his movies.
I will say something positive about it to a point, which is that it's one of M. Night Shyamalan's better movies, which... well,
that's still a hell of a statement to make.
So we'll save a deep dive on M. Night for another fun episode of Technicolor Blood in the future, but needless to say, we're not both of us are not real big fans.
No, but like everyone else, we started off being huge fans.
Absolutely. He was one of those guys immediately who just was on your radar. Is like, all right, well, I'm on board, whatever he does next.
And I remember so many articles at the time saying, is this the next Spielberg?
Yep.
And here we are.
Here we are
with him making a sequel to the second movie of his career, at least the second movie from a major studio release.
Yep.
He's had to travel all the way back to that just to try to get people to overlook the last 15 years of just really horrible movies he's put out.
Yeah. Obviously, he's got the one great movie, The Sixth Sense.
Yes.
And it's funny because I can say that he actually has two of the most hilariously awful movies I've ever seen in my life. Which I said we would save this for another time, but I just have to say it because it's on the tip of my tongue. I must share this. The Happening is so hysterically awful that I've actually purposefully rewatched it just for the fun of it. Stone cold sober.
Well, that was your mistake.
Lady in the Water, which I would not entertain watching again, but I just couldn't stop laughing at how bad it was when I was watching it.
Yes, and none of this even touches on the fact that he cast Jaden Smith in the lead role for a movie.
Oh my God, did he do that movie?
Yes.
The one with Will Smith?
Yes.
That sci-fi thing?
Yes.
Oh my God, I'd forgotten about that one.
Yeah.
That would actually be in the running for the worst of his filmography.
If you've forgotten that one, you've forgotten several other really bad movies he's done. We'll save it. But
After Earth, that's what it was.
Yes, yeah. Oh, I'm glad you remember the name. I couldn't remember the name. I just kept thinking Battlefield Earth because it's that bad.
Okay. We're getting too excited about this. We'll save this for another episode. Maybe one coming up soon to. Maybe we'll do it to coincide with the release of Glass.
Yeah. So all that aside, just taken on its own merits, what did you think of the trailer for Glass?
Oh, right, the actual trailer. I mean, it didn't do much for me. It just doesn't look good to me. I mean, they seem to be relying on sort of the humor and the wit of the characters and the situation that they're in, and it just the trailer just completely fell flat to me.
Yeah, mostly I feel like that trailer's sole purpose is to show people clips from Unbreakable and from Split and just say, hey, remember these movies? Well, look, I'm going to tie them all together now. You know, there wasn't really much going forward, like where that's going to lead or what that might imply. It was just, hey, remember these? Well, here's this another thing. And
yeah, it seems like little effort in the actual making a quality movie is there, and at least for the trailer, and more just like, hey, like you said, nostalgia, remember this? I promise this time it's going to be good. It's like Charlie Brown and Lucy in the Football with M. Night. I mean, not for us, because we've been wise to it for many years, but I've been able to follow, over the course of the years with social media, people being like, is M. Night back this time? Is M. Night back this time? The movie comes out, and it's just laughably bad. So,
yeah,
we're still ranting about M. Night 5 minutes later.
Yeah, all right, moving on.
Moving on, yes. All right, we watched another trailer called Hunter Killer, another in the series of movies that tries to take down the ones that are never coming off the board, Crimson Tide, The Hunt for Red October. They're just not going to catch that one. At least this certainly isn't the one that's going to catch them. It stars Gerard Butler and, strangely, one of the what seems like one of the most often working character actors in Hollywood, Common.
Yeah, and you get a lot of Common in this trailer.
So much Common.
Yeah, and he's not a great actor.
He's not, and the special effects in the trailer you mentioned while we were watching, and you're right, they didn't look great. It looks like a little low-budget kind of thing, and sort of Gerard Butler's career has sort of taken this track where if he's the lead in something, your initial reaction is, there's a ceiling on how good this could be.
Yeah. The movie also has, apparently, Gary Oldman in it. There's a quick shot of him in the trailer where he just sort of looks confused, like he didn't realize that he was in the movie either.
Yeah. The face he had, I can only describe as, is this Common that I'm talking to? I saw him on a TNT movie last week, and now I'm Academy Award winner Gary Oldman, and I'm acting with him.
Anyway. To the defense of this movie, I will just say this: it looks like what it is, which is just basically a throwback to an 80s action movie. I mean, it's dumb. It clearly is going to make no sense at all, but there's going to be lots of shooting and blowing up of stuff.
Yeah. The thing that stood out to me the most about the trailer, there's one shot towards the end where we've talked about, in fact, earlier we were off air, we were talking about how trailers for horror movies are sort of cut from the same template. Well, in this trailer for Hunter Killer, there's a moment at the end where, it's about submarines, obviously, and the submarine gets attacked, and there's this huge cloud of smoke under the water, and they're clearly setting up for it to come bursting out of this huge cloud.
Yes.
And what ends up happening is it very slowly, I would say sheepishly, makes its way out of the cloud to show you that it's safe. And then the trailer ends.
Yes.
Like, that should have been the most impactful moment of the trailer, to suck you in like, whoa,
right.
Huge action movie, big explosions. And it's just sort of like, are you sure you wanted to go with that? Because I feel like it might bump into me.
And here's a clue. It's from the people who made Olympus Has Fallen. So did you like Olympus Has Fallen? Because if so, you're going to love this.
Yeah. I kind of like Gerard Butler, though. It just.
Oh, yeah, sure. I actually do too.
I feel like with the right director and him as a heavy and not a leading man, I feel like he could be effective. But I don't blame the guy. He obviously wants to be a leading man, and why wouldn't you want to be a leading man as long as you can pull the checks for it and put in the work? But I feel like he's the kind of guy that could have that kind of career of being a complimentary actor who does really well when he's got a great director attached with him.
Yeah, I agree with you there, but I also feel like he's maybe gone too far down this path. I don't know if there's any backing out.
We'll never know. Well, maybe we will. I guess we'll find out. It's not going to be this movie.
Oh, God, no.
That's for sure. All right, so next up is a horror film coming up called Slender Man that is obviously based on the real-life case of the Slender Man that actually involved the death of a very young girl. Was she a teenager?
Well,
like a young teenager?
Yeah, so so the story you're referring to is, yes, 2 teenage girls murdered a 3rd teenage girl, and they did it because, or so they claimed, they did it to appease Slender Man. And that's a real thing that happened. Like, real girls murdered another real girl over, a silly internet meme. I don't think this movie is actually based on that, though.
I don't think it is. No.
Yeah, no, it's
Did I say? I'm sorry, not based on the events,
right?
But based on the same meme that led to their real life death.
Yeah,
right.
And it kind of threw me for a loop because, God, I swear I thought they had already made a Slender Man movie. I really, in my head, I can almost picture the trailer for this other generic-looking horror movie with the Slender Man character.
Maybe Slender Man is trying to make you make a movie.
Oh, yes.
You're way too old to be looking at Slender Man stuff, dude.
Yeah, no, you're right about that.
Yeah.
Which, I'm also too old to be watching this movie. It looks bad.
But yeah, it really is kind of like I described a minute ago. It's one of those horror trailers that looks like every other horror trailer where, there's the they bring it up from darkness, they go back to they fade back down to black. They've got some rhythmic music going on that is supposed to jolt you and scare you, and then it gets really quiet at the end, and it gets really loud, and they bring it down again, and like, oh, I'm out of the woods. No, there's going to be another scare before the end of the trailer. I mean, it's just kind of the same stuff over and over again, but that's sort of expected out of the horror genre because generally they're cheap to make, and they can make gobs and gobs of money. I mean, look at any of the Saw movies and, the Purge movies, and it seems like that sort of level, way, way down at the feet of Hereditary, obviously.
Yes, we know how much you love that movie.
Yeah, so that's probably all we need to. That's all the time we need to spend on Slender Man. Another interesting one that we watched was called Nico, 1988.
Ah, yeah.
And this is about Nico from Nico and the Velvet Underground, who was an actress model caught up in the whole Andy Warhol scene of the '60s, who did vocals on the debut album for Velvet Underground. Looked like a pretty interesting movie. And Terrence, why don't you share how it sort of tricked both of us?
Yeah, so if you're playing along at home,
or maybe we shouldn't revel that. I don't know. I'm not sure. Trailer spoilers are a real thing.
When you're done listening to this podcast, and don't worry, it's almost over. You need to hop online and just check out the trailer for Nico 1988. It's a fascinating trailer. I have no idea if this movie is good. I don't know who Nico is. I don't know anything about the Velvet Underground. I'm a blank slate on all of that. But watching this trailer, at first I thought it was a documentary, and then at some point you start realizing that there's a lot of acting going on. So it's not a documentary, but it also doesn't seem to be just a film about this character. Ultimately, that's what it is. But the actress playing Nico in this film is so compelling. While I was watching it, I kept trying to place who she could be. Like, I just knew it had to be a famous, well-known actress. It's not, or at least it was no one I was familiar with at all. Mm-hmm. But it's a fascinating trailer. I mean, it tricked me into thinking for a moment that it was an actual documentary, and I mean that's to the credit of the director and the actress in it. I mean, I'm intrigued. I would like to see this movie.
Yeah, there's something to be said if we're just grabbing a trailer out of the air and watching it, even if you know nothing about it and have no prior knowledge of it whatsoever. And this was a win in that area because it looked very intriguing to me too. I'm actually a huge fan of a handful of Velvet Underground songs. I'm not knowledgeable about the band necessarily. I prefer the stuff that Lou Reed did with them, but my knowledge pretty much ends there. So I at least have some referential knowledge of it, but the trailer really is all I need. Like you said, it looks interesting. It looks completely different from anything that we usually see as American audiences. I just assumed that was not an American movie in any
It did
way.
not feel American, no.
So yeah, that one definitely gets a recommend as a trailer, and I'm sure it won't be released in the States, at least not wide, but
Yeah.
I'll have to look for it streaming at some point.
Yeah, and if we can see it, we'll definitely talk about it on the pod. But yeah, take a minute and check out the trailer. I'd be curious to know what some of you out there listening might think of it.
Real quick, won't spend a lot of time on this, but if you're a fan of old Italian cinema, and there's probably none of you listening that actually are, there's a movie called, I really just grabbed this trailer because it had an interesting looking poster and an interesting title. The title of the movie is called Let the Corpses Tan. And I'm not well versed in 70s Italian movies, like both of us are in American 70s movies, but clearly it just kind of looked like what you would imagine is something that inspired the likes of the Tarantinos of the world.
It looked like a current day spaghetti western.
Right, yeah.
I mean, and the trailer leans into that very heavily.
Because the description of the trailer mentioned that it was an homage to quote Italian 70s crime movies. But so clearly it looks like you said, spaghetti westerns.
Yes.
So it makes me wonder if the person who wrote the description of the trailer actually had a grasp of what they were looking at. But it looks like it might be fun. It's hyper violent. It as far as imagination in the shot composition and the acting, it didn't really do anything for me.
Yeah, you mentioned Quentin Tarantino, and I think that's so true. This trailer would have been so at home in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Like this looked like the trailer for the kind of movies that we saw coming out all the time in the years of the big indie film boom that was going on. By today's standards, I mean, it looks almost like a relic from that era. It looks like, a filmmaker still kind of chasing that. But, it looks low budget, gonzo, kind of crazy crime story.
It looks like El Mariachi all over again.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. All right, and the last one we have for you tonight, we generally try to save one that we have some positive things to say about. BlacKKlansman by Spike Lee. That's coming out this week, actually. And this movie looks like a lot of fun. It stars, is it John David Washington? Is that his name?
Yes.
John David Washington. That's the son of Denzel Washington. He actually played for the St. Louis Rams for a while in the NFL. That didn't work out so great, and he's I want to say I could be wrong about this. Reach out and tell me I am if I am. But I think he also had a role on Ballers on HBO. And I actually saw a little bit of that, and he was actually pretty intriguing and funny in it.
He's got some big shoes to fill.
Yeah, for sure. That's unquestionably, and that'll hover his career that'll hover over him for his whole career. But here he is working with Spike Lee in a lead role in a movie that looks funny. It looks like it's got a political fuse lit on the end of it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
There's a specific phrase in the trailer that is a direct shot at. That I should say feeds directly into the current political climate. Adam Driver is also in this. It just looks like a fun movie.
Yeah, I mean, Spike Lee he runs hot and cold. He's made some truly great films, and then he's made a lot of just kind of strange, forgettable films. He's kind of an experimental director, and he likes chasing down different paths, and I got to respect that. This one looks like one of his good ones. It looks entertaining. It looks super well made. The craftsmanship, the camera work, just everything about it looks really good. And the story is very, very intriguing. It's about a police officer in the South who's going to infiltrate the Ku Klux Klan, and he happens to be a black police officer who does it. I mean, that description right there should be enough to pique your interest.
Yeah, the trailer is great. If you haven't seen the trailer yet, for sure check it out. And that's what I'm excited about.
And you know what? It's another one of the movies that's come along over the last 5 or 6 years that has been set in the 1970s. And that is so difficult to pull off. But this one, I feel, looks like the 70s.
Yeah.
I think they captured that look a lot better than several recent films have been able to do.
Yeah, I think I recall maybe one of the only things I actually liked about that Ridley Scott movie with Russell Crowe. Was it American Gangster?
Yes.
I felt like I was a toddler, but I felt like they captured the look of that pretty well. I just didn't remember the rest of the movie at all.
Yeah.
But this one, this one looks like If he didn't nail it, he at least nailed it to the point where the authenticism of it plus just whatever he's riffing off of on his own works great together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one in a big way. I'm definitely going to see this one in a theater.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like Spike Lee is one of those guys, like you said, that probably, I mean, I think there's a huge segment of film critics that overrate him and a huge segment that underrate him as well.
Yeah.
And
he's a guy who does not shy away from his political beliefs, and I think that causes some people to just dismiss him as, more of a rabble-rouser than a filmmaker, and I mean, that is unjustified because he is a very, very talented filmmaker.
Absolutely. All right, I think we can leave it at that. That looks like a good one. BlacKKKlansman, check it out. It actually starts in theaters this week. So we really appreciate you guys listening again. Terrence, any final thoughts as we go into the weekend?
Man, I hope you guys get out and enjoy the movie going experience because I know it's been a while since I've seen a movie and I'm starting to have some withdrawal symptoms from it. So I'm definitely going to try to catch something this weekend.
Sounds good. All right, you guys, take care out there. Hit us up and check us out next week. We'll be back with another episode of Technicolor Blood. Thanks for listening.
Thanks a lot, guys.